All right, I'm here with Jason Sumners, who is the head of the Missouri Department of Conservation and also a board member for National Deer Association. People have a lot of questions. I know some of you guys have been like, hey, go get them, but I want to have a respectful conversation, ask you questions, because I think that there's a bit of a disconnect between the everyday hunter and what I kind of consider the political class of hunters, the ones that at the top of the game agencies.
Sure.
I'm not seeing that there's, like, we look at what you do, and a lot of times we might not understand it, and that's what I'm hoping to understand here. But I want to start talking about the National Deer Association.
Well, before we get to
go
that, to your point of not feeling connected to, I saw your post and the feeling that the everyday hunter doesn't have access to state fish and wildlife agencies, I just don't think is true. And when I saw your post, I saw you were going to be here, I did what I feel like is the right thing to do and said, well, let's meet and chat, right?
Yes.
Like, let's just talk to one another.
Yes. Credit where credit's due.
Real issues, right?
He emailed me and said, hey, let's sit down and chat. He set this up. I didn't even set it up. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. And I appreciate that. I really do.
I don't have a problem talking to anybody. I'm not saying that's the case with others, because I consider myself a hunter, and that's part of why I'm here, is because I care about the outdoors. So.
All right, so let's start talking about the National Deer Association. There's a lot of people I respect, like Dr. Deer it has a problem with the organization. There's some other bigger names. Sure. And it's formerly QDMA.
Yeah.
And what I see from my perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but they used to have 70,000 members that were just like your average hunters. And just normal everyday guys like me that were members. Now their membership is so low that they're not even like reporting it. It seems to me it's maybe a couple thousand. And that tells me that the everyday hunter rejected what NDA, and I'll refer to the National Deer Association as NDA for this conversation.
Yeah.
And Missouri Department of Conservation is MDC.
Yep.
So we don't get tongue-tied. But it seems to me that when 97% of your memberships just go away, and I have all this complaining about the National Deer Association, and then I see, oh, well, you're a board member, and also your department is giving money to them, it seems bad. It looks bad. Do you see what I'm saying?
No, I certainly understand, appreciate, and think folks should ask questions, right? Like, how are their tax dollars or their permit fee and license dollars being spent? Our relationship with QDMA goes back a long time. I've known, well, just to back up a little bit, my professional development was in deer biology, right? So I went to the University of Missouri, got an undergraduate in fish and wildlife, and then went to Mississippi State and got a bachelor's degree working on deer management with Steve Damaris, one of the well-known deer researchers. And at that point, got to know Brian Murphy, Joe Hamilton. So the relationships with those guys, for me personally, has gone back decades.
Uh-huh.
And so our relationship individually with QDMA prior to it merging and the creation of the National Deer Association dates back to, I think, around 2012, in which we actually entered into a cooperative agreement with them to establish initially one, but then two cooperative positions, in which they were going out and working with us to work with private landowners to create deer management cooperatives. So in Missouri, a small land ownership state, right? Lots of small landowners trying to encourage deer hunters to work together to have some impact on the deer population. And at that time, that was really my role in the agency as our private lands deer biologist, transitioning into the deer program coordinator.
Okay.
So that's where our relationship started. It was where there was shared interest, and at that time, QDMA was doing a lot of education. They were getting the Deer Steward program stuff up and going. And so, there was a real good relationships, and that's just effectively what has continued now for the last decade plus.
But what they do now, when I see 97% of average hunters dropping them, and that seems like voting with your dollars, saying, hey, look, they don't represent us anymore, but yet you guys still give them money. It seems bad to me that your government agency would give money to an organization that hunters have said, hey, they don't represent us. That's my concern here.
Yeah, so I don't know that I would interpret it that way. And I don't fully understand all of the things that happened and the decisions that were made when QDMA turned it NDA and when they made sort of the intentional shift. And as a brand new board member, right? So give me a little grace here as of like December, understanding what the reasoning behind that was. But I think that's sort of the role, and why Nick and them asked me to serve on the board was that, hey, you're a state fish and wildlife agency director. You have a long history in deer and deer management. you offer the opportunity to provide us some good advice, right? Like, and that's what I view my role as, right? Like, to just offer perspective and advice to guide and direct them. But I think what you saw with many NGO, conservation-related NGOs through COVID, was some of them nearly collapsed, right? That funding model, the traditional funding model and the way they had been operating didn't work the same. And so a lot of them went through significant struggles, NWTF, Ducks Unlimited, many of the others. And so we work with those organizations in the exact same way that we do with NDA.
Yeah, but with NDA, I see everybody dropping. I don't see that I don't see 97% of these things, of these organizations losing their real life on the ground hunter memberships the way that NDA did, especially when you have people like Dr. Deere, who says, hey, he was one of the founding members of that. And he looks at it and says, hey, this is not what I did from the beginning. And I don't, and he doesn't support it. He doesn't even want to start a new organization because of what happened there. And I don't know all the details of it, but I just look at the everyday guy, which is me, and I see a separation between me and you.
I don't know how much he had involved in the original creation of it. I mean, this is Joe Hamilton's original idea as to how we do change deer management in the Southeast. A lot of it was built on some of the deer management cooperative work, some of the stuff that was originally sort of stood up in South Carolina, some of the work that Dave Wynn and others did when he was at Mississippi State to stand up the Deer Management Assistance Program and really say, hey, how do we work with private landowners and deer managers to do that work? And I still think in a lot of ways NDA is still doing that. They still have the Deer Stewardship Program. They have an increasing number of cooperative positions with other state fish and wildlife agencies. It isn't just us. They've got a couple in Arkansas. And again, it's that reflection of you can have a committee and they can go out there and kind of try to raise some money and they spend a lot of time and effort doing banquets, or you can have staff on the ground that are working with them out there helping them develop habitat management plans, helping them figure out how to better do deer management. And so that to me is where I see the shift having occurred. The other frustration I have, quite honestly, is in the deer management world, we cannot get on the same page and share a collective
We'll agree
voice,
with that.
right?
Yeah, we agree,
so
find
it's
agreement
so
there.
Splintered in so many ways that I was talking to a colleague that I know, I've known for a long time, that's in the outdoor industry. He's like, man, why don't we have an event like NWTF was last week for deer? Well, quite honestly, because we can't all agree. We can't all unify and say, we care about this thing. I've spent my life like studying and trying to do what's right to protect this incredible critter. But we can't get on the same page as how to effectively do that.
So this is the one question I really want to nail you down on here is, do you think that the National Deer Association, that the average hunter, the people that follow my page, right? We got, 1 million followers total. Do you think that they look at the National Deer Association and go, yep, they represent us?
I don't know that they do. But I think it's a reflection of the really hard deer management challenges that we face today. And I'm not sure a lot of folks know who do represent them.
I would agree with that last part.
And so I think this is a frustration we sort of face in society. And I think in the deer hunting space, we've found ways to divide ourselves, right? Like, what do you kill it with? Where do you kill it at? Do you have, do you feel like you have access? Do you feel like the agency's oriented against you? We continue to find ways to not have these like open conversations to find common ground and take care of the critter. Instead of we want to just fight over something as to who has the voice, who has the space, and I just don't think it's constructive.
So if you don't think that, or you don't know that because I want to be accurate there, if you don't know that the average guy thinks that NDA actually represents them, does it make sense to, you guys have given them $500,000 in funding, and also, I forget the guy's name, I won't use his, I have his name here, but there's a guy that used to work for your organization and is now an employee of the National Deer Association, who is a deer, what is his title? It is a deer outreach specialist.
Yeah.
So what that seems like to me is that you guys are paying NDA, and you guys are getting, your employees are now working for NDA to kind of push your narrative with government money. And it reeks of, hey, we want, the political class gets to tell the average everyday guy right here what's going on, because we don't agree, but how, like, you guys control the funding, so you're trying to control the narrative, even though when I look at the comments and I ask people, it's overwhelming that they don't support NDA, they don't support, I'd like to move into some CWD stuff because there's some misconceptions there. But
Yeah.
that's kind of like my
Yeah.
perception. I think most people's perception here is that you guys got the funding, you're pushing the propaganda, and we don't agree with it, or the average guy doesn't agree with it.
Yeah, and I don't think that's true. And I don't think that bears out in terms of where a lot of the hunting public is on a lot
So you
of
think that
issues.
most of them do agree with NDA or what you guys are wanting?
I think in general, they believe in the direction. Are there particular policy issues where folks get divided on? Yeah. And that is the frustration too, is that it feels like you're either all with us or you're all against us.
Okay.
Right? And I do believe NDA has the hunter and the whitetail deer in the best interest of the hunting public. And sometimes those are challenging conversations, CWD being one of those. But in no way, shape, or form do I tell Nick and Lindsay and Kip what they have to say, nor have I ever. I've known Kip for nearly 20 years and known Lindsay for nearly that long too, as professional colleagues, and not as a, well, we're giving you money, so I expect you to do X.
Well, money equals influence, and I mean,
Yeah.
if
But it's
I've said this
working
before,
together for a shared outcome.
it also equals
Yeah.
influence, though.
But it's not corruption. It's not the things that you all have
I didn't say it was
suggested
illegal,
would
but it
be.
can be corrupt. If somebody's giving me if somebody starts handing me $500,000, I start thinking that that's a pretty good dude right there. I'm like, you know what? You make some good points. And when
But this
money
happened
changes
long
hands,
before. That's what I'm saying is
Yeah.
the wildlife management community is extremely small. And these are long existing relationships. I will promise you, there have been times in which there were messages or positions that QDMA has had that I didn't necessarily think were helpful. Right?
Yeah.
So that's not, doesn't make it a bad organization or make it led by people who aren't sharing in the best interest of deer and deer management.
well, I think
or
that the
hunting
average
public.
guy, from what I've seen, is I have a different perspective than
Yeah.
you. You think that most people agree with the direction. I actually think that most people don't agree with the direction of most game agencies anymore. I think there's a real credibility problem there now. That's what I'm seeing. I don't have an actual
disagree.
survey. So you agree that there's a credibility issue with
yeah.
game agencies. So,
Yes.
and I would like to bridge that gap here a little bit and kind of to move on. We'll move past the funding stuff.
Yeah.
Let's move on to some CWD things.
Yeah.
I know that the general hunting public looks at CWD and goes, I'm not seeing this affect deer herds. I'm not seeing this.
Yeah.
The only thing that's affecting my deer herd is the CWD policy, not the CWD itself. Can you address that
Yeah,
and give us like some real hard evidence?
Is the treatment worse than the problem, right?
Yeah.
Like those kinds of questions. And I firmly believe that CWD is one of those issues that, again, reflects to the human condition. We have plenty of chronic health disease issues, right? Like heart disease is a chronic lifestyle problem.
Yeah.
We have a real hard time as people dealing with those things that we don't see happening in front of us every day. And so in my mind, CWD is that. It is a long-term chronic concern to the deer population that fortunately the vast majority of deer hunters are not impacted by right now. But we do a real bad job as humans looking a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades down the road and saying, oh geez, if only I'd lived a little bit of cleaner life in my 20s and 30s, if I'd have known I was going to live this long, I'd have taken better care of myself, right? Like how many people say that? And so to me, that is fundamentally the thing we face with CWD management. And I agree, some of the challenges are hard. Some of them are reasonable. Some of them could border on being unreasonable, right?
Okay, is there any, I guess the number one thing I have is we haven't seen any deer populations that have been decimated by CWD, even though their CWD's been around for 60 years.
Yeah, so that's not true.
But there's been tons of deer populations that have been decimated by the policies. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I would disagree that deer populations have been decimated by the policies.
Okay.
That is not true.
In areas where they killed a bunch of deer, like in CWD zones, you don't think that lowers populations? Or
It lowers
what?
populations, but it does not decimate them.
Okay, well then that's a difference in terms maybe.
We've
okay.
been doing active CWD management in Lynn and Macon County, Missouri since 2012, and we're shooting as many deer in those counties as we were prior to CWD management efforts going into place.
So are
And
there
that
less
is
deer in
not-
those counties now?
No.
So then the CWD policies, how would they actually
They're very
help?
localized. They're very localized. So a lot of our CWD management efforts have been localized around where CWD positive detections have been found. They aren't broad scale. So, but folks certainly worry about restrictions on feeding, more liberalized regulations. But what we've put into place is not decimated deer populations, and it's still maintain a lot of recreational harvest opportunity across the county.
Okay.
And to back up,
Yeah,
let's
go ahead.
back up. We've been
Yeah.
running fast.
Yeah.
To say that CWD is not impacting deer populations is completely false.
Do you have evidence of
Recently
that?
published articles out of Arkansas clearly demonstrate the impacts of CWD on that local population.
I just finished reading that study last week.
Yeah,
The Tier
yeah.
1 area in Arkansas. Can you speak to that? Like, how much has it lowered the deer population? Like, give your side of it to people so they can know what that's going on.
Yeah,
there.
so the paper suggests that they're currently experiencing in kind of the worst part of that area about a 13 to 15% annual decline, right? So once prevalence in those adult females reaches 29%, I think is the number they came up with, the population is no longer able to sustain itself. And so those are numbers that have played out over time. If you look at the work that DeVivo did in eastern Wyoming, I think that work was published around 2015 or so. Their numbers suggest that once adult female prevalence gets to 26%, the population is no longer self-sustaining, and they started to see population declines. It hasn't been published yet, but they produced reports from the Wisconsin DNR on their long-term
I'm waiting for that to come out.
predator prey. A lot of us have been, indicates again that 26 to 29% prevalence in adult females, populations begin to decline. And so I'm not going to, and I don't think anybody's going to suggest that it's going to extirpate populations, but it absolutely is a significant added mortality effect that has long-term implications.
So the Arkansas study, because that's the one I'm familiar with. I'm not
Yeah.
familiar with the other one you mentioned about out west a little more.
Yeah.
I'm more focused on whitetails and stuff.
Yeah, that was in whitetails in Wyoming.
Yeah, I didn't read that study. I'd have to read that myself.
It's really fascinating because it shows very similar percentages in prevalence. Very different system too, right? There, you look very similar percentages in Arkansas. If you look at the data that's coming out of Wisconsin, it all suggests that, and we've known that for a long time from a deer population management standpoint, when you annually harvest about 25% of your adult females, you have a stable population. Anytime mortality goes above that 25%, you're pushing the population down. If mortality is below that 25%, the population can grow. So a CWD builds up in the population and you have 30, 40, 50% of your adult females have CWD, and you know they're going to live less than a year and a half, it is going to drive the population down. So you get a much younger age structure.
With the Arkansas study, I read that myself, and it suggested that they have a 16% decline in the population. But the problem with that I had with it is in that Tier 1 zone, and even in the study, it said that it was even bigger amongst bucks, which is what kind of scares hunters. Like, the bucks are going away, right? That's what we're scared of. But in that zone, they eliminated antler point restrictions. They increased tags to 5. They were more. The exact term on their Arkansas website was they gave more liberalized tags. They increased. It was an example of CWD policy killing those deer and increasing harvest. If you're killing more deer, you're going to have less deer. The argument from like kind of my side, what I'm seeing right now is that yes, when you increase deer tags, you'll have less deer, and you're saying no, that was CWD, but I saw the hunter shoot them. That's my concern here.
I think that's completely a reasonable question, and it's one of these where we've seen this play out to broad scale hunting regulation changes largely don't have an impact on the trajectory of CWD. It can have an impact on populations. Although in the West, we can talk about that in a minute, buck harvest strategies probably changed some of that. But yeah, I think in that scenario, the disease was way more prevalent than they thought, right? So Arkansas was pretty late to detecting that disease. So when you look across the country, they detected it in, 2016, 2017, somewhere around that time frame. When they first went in and found it, it was already at 25% prevalence. In Missouri, we've been doing extensive surveillance since the early 2000s, and when we find the disease in a new place, it's very, very low, very, very small. So the disease had already spread pretty significantly in Arkansas. And so I don't disagree that a very liberal set of regulations, when the disease is probably already impacting your population, has negative consequences. So that's why they're having the conversation of saying this population can no longer sustain recreational harvest of does.
Yeah, but the only
and so they're
study
going to draw back on that.
Yeah, the problem I have is the only study that I have, the only actual scientific proof that we have of does it hurt deer populations is in an area where the CWD policies are pretty extreme. So like I don't see any actual evidence that CWD is hurting the deer herd, only that the policy. Like, can you?
But when you look at the mortality factors, if you back out what the mortality factors were, CWD is a significant portion of that.
How many deer
Add
were dying from
20%.
CWD?
It wasn't it 20%?
I don't remember seeing that part.
They had broke out what proportion of the mortalities were attributed to these various diseases. Hunter harvest was a portion of it. CWD was like the number 2 factor.
So is there just like
So
deer
you
laying around
remove-
dead from CWD?
Yeah.
They're finding a bunch of dead deer in those zones
So
from CWD.
They radio collared 400 or 500 deer over a several year period and followed them to their outcome. Right?
Is that in this study?
Yeah. I can send
I'll look
you,
it up.
I can
I'll
send
look
you
it up. I
the,
didn't see
the
that in
actual
there. I had to skim it to get done with it before he came here, so maybe. But
Go
yeah.
look at the actual peer-reviewed article.
Yeah, that's what I read.
And it shows those things. So you think about a certain number of deer get hit by cars, right?
Mm-hmm.
We shoot a certain number. A certain number of them bucks are gonna die because they fight, right? There's gonna be these causes of mortality. If I remember correctly, about 20% of all that mortality was just directly related to CWD.
All right, to everybody watching this, I will look at that part of the study and I'll write about it, and I'll message you before I do it. I'll send it to you because I want to make sure that I'm not misrepresenting anything you think. Because I didn't see. Again, I had to skim part of that study to get it done before we came here. But that's the only study that I've seen, and I just see these areas where deer are being. You say that there's lower deer numbers, but there's also higher tags, more liberalized tags, antler point restrictions gone. So that's what I'm seeing, and that's what most people are seeing.
Yeah. So what we know is largely these broad scale regulation things might slowly shift, like the direction or the rate at which CWD increases or changes in the population. But largely what drives it is you have to cut off transmission, right? You have to find a way to stop transmission from one female to another female, or from those females to the bucks that come around and encounter. Mm-hmm. And so what we've done in Missouri and what's been done in Illinois for a long time is very localized, targeted removals. A lot of ours has been with landowners. Well, 100% of our stuff has been with landowners, right? Like their permission or their authorization or them doing it themselves. But when you have a CWD positive female, the likelihood of her offspring and the females that are related to her being positive is so many times greater than a deer 4 or 5 miles down the road that has absolutely no contact with him, right?
Yeah, and all of this stuff is kind of predicated on the fact that CWD is killing the deer herds. That's the crux of this whole thing. If we can prove without a fact that CWD is lowering deer herds, then a lot of people would say, no, I'm a little more comfortable with some of these regulations, and myself included. I'll be fully, because I'm not on board with them, because I haven't seen the evidence that that the CWD is killing the deer, only that CWD policies are. So if you can prove that, and I'll look at that part of the study, but you have to prove that.
There's a long
that
list.
Changes everything.
There's a long list of peer-reviewed journal articles that go all the way back to Bethlehem deer.
Yeah.
Right. So we definitively know that CWD is a fatal disease. Like many neurodegenerative diseases, nobody recovers from. There is no cure at this point for neurodegenerative diseases, which is what CWD is. And so again, there's this long body of scientifically published information that clearly demonstrates that deer get infected by CWD, they can transmit it to one another, and that it absolutely shortens their life. Right?
Okay.
It might result in them being more vulnerable to harvest. It results in them being more vulnerable to be hit by a car. It results in them being more vulnerable to being eaten by predators, right? All of those things contribute to increased mortality, so lower survival. And that's been demonstrated in a number of studies. The stuff in Wisconsin again, the stuff in Colorado, research
Can you
projects
send me those
in
studies that you have? I haven't seen some of those.
I'm happy to do that.
I would love to read some of those.
And so it's this really fascinating thing that folks were disbelieving and unaware of CWD through the 20 teens, and a lot of work was done to build understanding. And then I'll tell you, in the last 4 or 5 years, it's like we've reeled back all of that understanding of what we knew about CWD, and folks are no longer believing that it's real, no longer believe that it's killed deer. I mean, just recently in Marion County, Missouri, near Hannibal, we had a guy contact us, say, hey, I got a sick deer in my yard. Last year, they had a sick deer that they found dead. Well, this deer came into his yard, was laying in his yard for several days, extremely emaciated. He was put a bowl of water out for it. He was drinking excessive amounts of water, like the typical things that a late-stage CWD clinical deer does. It laid down in his yard and died. Our team went in and necropsied that animal. No broken bones, no old wounds, no injuries, no other infections. Like, the deer died of CWD in the guy's yard.
Okay.
So it absolutely kills deer, and we know it accumulates in populations through time, right? So the number of infected deer accumulate through time. So in most places, when you've been doing good surveillance, you go in and you got less than 3% of the deer are infected. Is CWD impacting the population at that time? No. And so that's where it's real hard to take proactive, active actions when there's relatively few infected individuals.
That's what I want to move into next then. Then what are the real solutions?
Until we're far down the road.
Okay, but what are the real solutions? Because I listened to you on the Jury Outdoors podcast, and you said this isn't going to solve the problem. It's going to keep going. We can't stop it. It might extend it how long until we have a problem. But is there any actual solutions to stopping CWD, or does this, because a lot of the pushback I get is there's two things I get from actual solution. Well, three things. One is the kind of the policies you're pushing, and we've discussed that at length now. But the second one is it has to be either a natural solution where the genetically, like the deer who are more they have certain genes that like high fence farms. I know I've talked to some of these guys that have like honed in on like certain genes that make them less susceptible to dying from CWD. Is this what you're doing helping, or is it hurting? Because if you constantly like kill all the deer in those areas, it's resetting the genetics. This is the argument that I'm getting. I don't know a lot about this yet. What's a real solution to this long term? You say you want long-term solutions. What's a real long-term solution?
So I think it's a fascinating question. We're in that space where we don't have a long-term solution yet, but there are mitigation strategies we can do to try to minimize the impacts, right? And I think the genetic stuff is extremely fascinating. I think there's a lot to learn. I know folks question you're going in a place where there's CWD and you're shooting additional deer, or you're removing those that may have been susceptible. The part in the back of my mind is any hunter harvest is probably just randomly selecting individuals anyway.
For the most part,
Maybe. What we know from the harvest data, though, when I look at the harvest rates in Wisconsin and you look at their CWD infected deer, they're shooting CWD infected deer at a much higher rate than what they are uninfected deer. So a similar project to what was going on in Arkansas. They had a bunch of deer collared, they followed them through their lifespan. These CWD infected deer during the hunting season are about 3 times more likely to be shot than an uninfected
But wouldn't that push you towards more of a natural solution then?
It is, because hunter harvest, targeted removals, those kinds of things, I think are inherently saying behaviorally these infected deer are behaving differently. And if we can remove them at a higher rate than they have the opportunity to transmit the disease to another deer, we can keep prevalence rates lower.
But prevalence rates aren't going to, in the short term, but like we talked from the beginning, the whole premise was we've got to think long term. And so for a long term solution with what you're kind of advocating for and what your policies are, I don't see that, and I think you agree, it's not a long term solution. It's like, hey, let's sit back and let's try to figure this out. I think there's some validity to that idea. But if we're killing all the deer that are getting real sick real fast, and then the ones that aren't getting sick real fast, that seems like it would push me towards more saying, hey, let's abandon all this stuff. Let's let all of the deer that are really susceptible to it, it'll make it easier for hunters to kill them, and they'll be killed off. And the genes, naturally, that are less susceptible will take over time. Do you see what I'm saying there?
Yeah, so natural selection plays itself out over tens of hundreds of years, not right here and right now. Like I don't know what it might look like if we let CWD run its course, but we do know we will have a lot more sick deer on the landscape. We'll have a lot fewer hunting opportunities coming soon.
And I would push back on that a little bit, saying that I still don't have like I still haven't personally seen that that CWD is lowering deer rates that much. It's not, like I look at Wisconsin. Wisconsin is full of CWD, and they've remained the top state for big bucks. They've remained the top state for harvest. I think that they're number one on every big buck category that you can possibly have. Typical, non-typical, everything. And they went through it. They're at the top. So why is it that if they've been dealing with this so long, they have such high prevalence rates that that's not showing up in the data?
This is a time scale and spatial scale challenge that is really hard to comprehend. That is not true for that core of Southwest Wisconsin. So it's real easy to say, oh, it's been in Wisconsin forever. Well, it was in a small portion of Wisconsin in the early 2000s. And it's been slowly spreading. You start taking statewide surveillance numbers and you're glossing over the localized impacts of the disease. So it's real easy to manipulate what the numbers are and how those numbers are communicated to tell a different story. But I'm just saying, go look at the Wisconsin study in which they looked at CWD.
When it gets released,
Yeah. They've got field notes out on their public website that shows some of the general things that they're reporting from it. And within that corridor, you have extremely high prevalence rates. And if we can agree that CWD kills deer, and it kills them 18 to 24 months after infection, when you have prevalence rates in excess of 40%, 50%, 60%, it is absolutely reasonable to draw the conclusion that it is having an impact on the population.
Then why isn't it having an impact on the deer harvest in Wisconsin? Those are the rates across the whole state right now, right? Like the whole state's
well, the
southern part of the state, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah,
there's
but
like
it's
high
still
prevalence
a 3
rates.
or 4 county area. Go look at the deer harvest in those specific counties. Don't blow it up. Go look at the deer harvest in those specific counties. The buck harvest in, is it Iowa or Dane County, I think, is the lowest it's been since the 1970s.
They also have insane levels of like tags and everything. They've done a lot of the CWD policy, though.
But a deer population that is doing well thrives. And very few places are we actually shooting so many deer that we're causing the population to decline. Very few places do we have enough hunter harvest across the Midwest and very well adapted populations that were over.
They were very aggressive in Wisconsin in those areas, correct?
15 years ago, yeah. They quit in 2007. They pulled back the Ernebuck. They've had relatively restrictive antlerless regulations. So, yeah, these are the noise. If you want to doubt, you can find ways to create doubt. Or we can have a conversation about what's going on, right?
Yeah.
No, I don't disagree. And I think these are all completely reasonable questions to ask as to what the impact is.
Yeah.
But again, the data suggests CWD kills deer. And when it accumulates to a sufficient level, it will have an impact on the population.
Well, I'm going to put those studies out there, and I'm going to write about them. And I know you're a busy guy, but I'll send it to you before I do it. I want to make sure I
it's an important issue, right? Like it matters to me, and I want us to be able to work together and have healthy dialogue and not have just throwing rocks across the
but
the
I see a big
interwebs as
problem.
to what's going on.
I see a big problem with not. Again, my original point that like the hunting, and I don't want to use buzzwords too much, but like the hunting elite, the political class, like they're up here and we're down here.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how the feeling is. Yeah. So that's where kind of the disconnect is.
I mean,
no, you're sitting down with me. And again,
the
credit where credit's due.
Political elite. I grew up. My dad had coonhounds. I can remember as a kid us selling when coonhides were actually worth something.
Yeah,
right?
before I was alive.
Right, yeah. I can remember the day that the fur buyer would come and we had one deep freezer completely dedicated to just raising,
That's cool.
saving furs, right? So there's no political elite about me. And I think we should be willing to reach out, have these kinds of conversations, figure out where we have blind spots, right? This isn't a 0 or 1 kind of scenario.
I think it's important.
It's a complicated issue, and it's challenging.
So I only listened to a couple podcasts you were on, and it was mostly just a bunch of people who agreed with you. And I come into this with things that I don't agree on, and that's what I really respect about you coming on here, because I want people to see, hey, look, this is the pushback in both directions.
Yeah.
I want you to push back on me,
Yeah.
me to be able to push back on you,
Yeah.
so that we can come together as a hunting
Yeah.
community. You made that point, I think it's a very good point, that we don't agree, and that's why we can't have it's a really good point. Why don't we have an event like this here at the SCI for deer hunting? It's a way bigger, a group of people than the SCI group.
Yeah.
And I think that these kind of conversations are important in both directions.
Oh,
but
I agree.
And I appreciate your conversation, but I want to end on one more thing,
Yeah.
because I get a lot of questions about this. High fence deer farms.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people, there's misconceptions about them. There's a lot of people saying, oh, all the CWD is coming from high fence deer farms. How do you see two-part question. One is, how do you see high fence deer farms from a management perspective in your state? And how do you see the CWD impact from high fence deer farms as it applies to it getting out and getting into the free range population?
Yeah, again, this is another one of those spaces where folks want to just draw a hard line between, the guys who have high fence deer operations and state fish and wildlife agencies, and that's not. In Missouri, they've been around for a long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, whether you ethically agree with them or don't agree with them, they exist, right? And I think they have a place. And so we have spent a lot of time. There are a couple of them here that I'll go chat with as soon as we're done. I feel like we've got good working relationships with. Have we had to implement some policies that were really tough and challenging to try to minimize the risk of moving CWD around? Absolutely. Just like we had to do with the hunting public in terms of free range deer, right? So these are things all about trying to mitigate risk. I'm not one to point blame or point fingers at like, oh, you guys caused this or you guys caused that. It's just like understanding what sources can be. Mm-hmm. Have captive deer and elk likely moved CWD around the country? Absolutely. Have hunters moved CWD around in the back of trucks with deer carcasses and other things? Yeah, absolutely, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, it's not saying one was right or one was wrong. And so I don't think we should do that. As I mentioned, I earlier just had a good chat with Sean Schaefer. I've known Sean for a long time, North American Deer and Elk Farm Association. I think he's a great guy, and I think we have these same kinds of conversations about what are the risks? What are the most significant risks? How do we work together to try to solve some of these problems? Because I agree, inside of a fence, the captive deer guys have a great opportunity to help us learn some of these questions. And so they should be focused on, especially like the genetics kind of stuff. I worry about some of the genetic conversations of resistance that we're getting a little far ahead of the science.
I think the general hunter would agree with that. It's scary to say we're going to play with genetics. It is. Like from a free range perspective, even though they might have some solutions there. I'm open
it's
to
a
all of it.
space we should be working and talking about and building understanding. And I absolutely encourage our team and myself to have those collaborative conversations. What does it mean? I don't care where this whitetail deer exists, whether it's inside a fence or outside a fence. I care about making sure we do what we can to keep it healthy.
Yeah.
That's what drives me. And so, again, I don't like others can get into the realm of ethics, right? Like as a state fish and wildlife agency, that's a space we're not really well positioned to operate in. That's individual decisions and what's societally acceptable. So they've been around Missouri for a long time. We have no desire to get rid of them. We've got some great ones, and they're doing really good things, and I think they're trying to manage their herds. We closed the borders to the importation of whitetail deer and mule deer in 2018. That became effective with Supreme Court decision. I'm thankful they've not detected a CWD positive inside of a fence in Missouri since. Our original detection, right? So I think that's an absolutely good thing that the industry should be proud of and should celebrate. They've been doing a good job of testing. They've been doing a good job of keeping track of records, so that in the event that we do find one, that we've got a way to manage and mitigate it. But no, I think we should be working with all interested parties that care about these cool critters.
Awesome. Well, hopefully this will help us to come together more as a hunting community. I don't want to be divisive. Sometimes I can get that way too. I'm as guilty of it as anybody.
Yeah.
But, and I appreciate you coming on here. I appreciate you coming on to not just go onto a platform that agrees with you, but someone that's going to push back on you. And I think that that's important for us to have a better understanding in both directions, whether it's from the game agency's perspective or the average everyday guy. And I appreciate you coming on here. I want to hear from you guys. What do you guys think? what questions should I have asked? I'm not an interviewer. I'm just a regular guy. I do a lot of reading and a lot of writing. I don't do a lot of long form interviews, but this has been fun. It's been informative, and I hope that people learn from this. And I want to hear what people have to say about it. And hopefully, after I learn more from other people, I get calls and stuff from people all the time, and I'm sure I'll get some criticism. You should have asked this. You should have asked that. Hopefully, at some point in the future, I can sit down and talk with you guys. I'm glad that you guys are open to the us asking questions.
Yeah.
And just so everybody knows, I've run Doge programs in Ohio, and I'm going to be doing that for game agencies. I think that we need to hold them accountable for where they're spending hunting dollars, where they're going, and that there needs to be more transparency surrounding that. And so I'm going to do that as one post a day. Is there anything you'd like to say to end this off?
Well, no, I don't have a problem with that, right? Like most of us don't. I want to have open, honest conversations with our hunting public, with all the citizens of the state of Missouri about the challenges we face and the opportunities that exist. And so I just encourage folks that disagree. You said most of the podcasts I've been on have been friendly folks who generally agree with you, because I'll tell you quite honestly, nobody else asked. I've not turned down an interview or a podcast opportunity or some other conversation by anyone. So to say that I'm only going to friendly audiences, we have to both reciprocate that.
I said credit where credit's due.
Which is why I reached out to you and say, hey, let's just have a conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, I care about this critter as much as anything. And so for folks to suggest that there's ulterior motives is one that personally hurts.
That's why I sat down with you. I want you to know that. And I believe that your heart's in the right place, even if we might have some disagreements. I do believe that you're open, transparent. And anybody else out there that's making the same claim, nobody that disagrees with me will call me. Hey, message me. I'm willing to sit down with anybody and talk to anybody. I am just like you.
Let's start
I appreciate it.
Right?
Yes, absolutely. Hey, thanks for your time. I really do appreciate it. Thanks, guys.